Start recording. All right. That's not updating in the viewport. Hopefully, it's updating on in the video as it captures. So, yeah. Has anybody had any issues with that in the videos, like watching the video for the anything not updating, like the video lagging or anything like that? Okay. Well, hopefully they're going all right. I think it's interesting just walking around and looking at what you all have. Like, everybody kind of had a different take on it. A lot of people had theirs being a little more cautious as they approached, maybe like a quick look around before they approached. A lot of people were going much more for like childish curiosity. And I think the way that people had them react, like everything from jumping back to this like heavy breathing to somebody else I remember somebody in the back here had like a Looney Tunes like smear frame out, like they're like stretched across the screen. So if there's some like this is not just me trying to have some form of class interaction by having you walk around. What I think is important to recognize here is that all of that is your creative decisions, right? All of that performance is something that you as an animator choose. Like, that is why motion capture is not going to replace your job, right? Is because there's an infinite number of ways to have any action happen. There is no like one perfect run cycle. There's no one perfect surprise reaction, right? It's all a series of creative choices you make, right? And the blocking pass, for me, that's what we've done so far. This is the blocking pass. This is where you get to craft that performance, right? This character can't move itself. This character is just a bunch of rigged controls that you manipulate, and you try to get some form of performance out of it, right? Hopefully by walking around, you maybe got some ideas. It's not saying like try to take somebody else's idea and make yours like the same thing. It's more like maybe you saw some creative choices that somebody else made, and it will make you start guessing or second guessing some of your choices to see if you should push them a little bit more, right? And a lot of times that's the answer. If you're questioning whether it should be bigger or whether it should be more exaggerated or whether you should push the arc in that character's pose more, the answer is probably yes. Like in most cases, it's not too big. It's usually a little too small, right? So what I notice on mine, like when I watch it, is that there are places I probably could have exaggerated this more. And so this happens all the time to me. I'll work on something, I'll come back the next day and look at it, and I'll see ways of making it better. So if you see those, make them better, like push them, right? I'm not going to go too much into a whole technical lecture today. Today is more about talking about the next few stages of the process, right? What we have here is the blocking pass of this. This is the foundation of the animation, right? This is the without this part, the animation doesn't make sense, right? What a lot of people want to do now is go into the graph editor, set it to auto tangent, and be like, I'm done animating. I've set my keyframes. I'm done, right? This is just your first pass, right? From here, we have to continue to be in control. We have to still make more decisions about how do we guide the character from pose A to pose B, right? We've established these poses. Now Maya is going to make very boring decisions about what happens in between. And our job as an animator is to try to push those and make those more interesting, or at least less boring, right? So I'm going to go ahead and take mine out of stepped mode. I know we just put it in there, but I'm going to select all of this, go to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor, select all of these keys, and take it out of stepped mode. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to Auto, and now it's in this. And so when I hit play on this, this is what Maya has done to your keyframes. Now, it could definitely be worse, but it could be a lot better, right? There's a lot of data in each of those poses, right? Whenever I make a change to one of those controls, there's a number related to it. And Maya is just going to kind of draw, for the most part, a straight line between those. It's going to put a little ease in and out at the beginning of it, but it's going to draw pretty much a mathematically straight interpolation between those, which is going to result in a lot of poses in between here, in between these key poses, that are not as interesting, right? So we have pose A here, our character is sort of neutral, and pose B, the character leans forward. If I go to the middle of this, if I go to frame 10, like that pose isn't as interesting as pose A or B, right? I'm going to go ahead and set a keyframe on everything. Do I have that button still yet? I do not. I'm going to go ahead and make me a quick button here. Edit, clear all, select Hobo. There we go. So now I have that button to select my entire rig. So if I go ahead and set a keyframe here on frame 10, you can see this pose, I have some interesting curves in here. This pose, I have some interesting curves in here. This pose, everything is very blah, right? So we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but if I were to go in here and sort of draw sort of a sweeping line from the tip of the top of the character to the bottom, you see we kind of get this like, we get this swooping curve through it this way, right? Let me undo that one, try to draw it again a little bit better. Oh, that's not better. Right. So we get sort of this arc this way. If I step forward to my next key pose, which I think was right about there, right? Yeah, 20, I get this, right? I'm also getting some interesting shapes here on the back of my character, right? I'm getting these shapes here. The front of my character is sort of this smooth arc. But if I go back to, you know, I have this shape here. There's a little concave, convex, like contrast there, right? So these two poses have a lot more interesting stuff going on with the shape. Maya in between there, though, gives us just sort of this, just sort of dull, right? That's not as interesting to look at. And the line of action is just this perfectly vertical line, right? On top of that, we could also sort of trace, if we were to trace the points in this, we're going to find that a lot of things are sort of traveling in a straight line, right? So imagine if this character had like a little dot on top of his head, right? If we were to find the tip top of the character's head, what is the path that is taking, right? One of the ways we can see that, if I go ahead and turn off, go ahead and turn off my grease pencil here. I'm going to go ahead and turn my controls back on, and I'm going to select this control here, because it's right there at the top of the character's head. Right? And I'm going to, sorry, let me just go ahead and delete all these so I can close this down. Oh my, what happened to his eyeball? I don't know what just happened. All right, so I've messed up my character. It'll be all right. He'll come back. So go up here to the top of this eyeball and go to the top of this control, animation, visualize, create editable motion trail. And if I go look at my motion trails, you're going to see like that's kind of it's got a little bit of curves, but it's got a lot of straight lines happening in here too, right? So this is really what we're looking at, is like Maya is going to give us a dull result. And even if it's not like what we have to do is kind of look for the ways of spicing it up, looking for the ways of making it more interesting, but also a little bit more physically accurate, right? How we do that is we just define what happens between pose A and pose B. Right? For my character, this is pose A, this is pose B, and I need it to if this is pose A and this is, whoa, what is happening? Let's do this. Break that. Panels. Okay. I'm not necessarily sure what's happening there, but I'll keep working with it anyway. Okay. Pose A, pose B. I need to figure out how to make this pose in between more interesting, right? This is called a breakdown key. Now, the breakdown key is going to give us more information about how your character gets from one pose to the other. Right? So think of this as like I always use this as an example, but your character raising his or her hand, right? So the teacher's in class, the teacher asks a question, and the character wants to answer that question, right? Depending on their personality, they could raise their hand in a million different ways. So even if their arm down pose is the same and their arm up pose is the same, how they get there is going to be different, right? So it could be that the character is super eager and they throw their arm up really quickly, then that pose in between looks more like this, right? Like their arm is sort of curled up, like they're dragging their hand up to sort of throw it up, right? Versus the character being reluctant to answer that, the in-between pose may be like this as they go to raise their hand, right? So how our character gets from pose A to pose B, from frame 1 to frame 20, right now Maya is just saying like it's the halfway point, right? You have to make a creative decision here based off of why the character would move that way, right? Our character is what emotion right now? Curious, right? So that's going to inform this, right? If somebody were to put a box in front of you, right, and you're curious about what's in it, right, you're not going to be like, right? That's bored, that's like frustrated, right? Curious means your character's probably going to lean in with your head first, right? This is why video reference is important. Is to think about how or why your character would do that. So in this pose, it doesn't look like the character's leaning forward first, right? On top of that, it's kind of a straight line. So what I would do is I'm going to push my character a little deeper into this. I'm going to lean them forward if I can. This. But I want to continue to keep the back part of the character back here. And so I can sort of start to step forward. Oh, stupid auto key wasn't on. So let's try that again. Push the character down, lean them forward, pull this back a little bit, right? I'm going to push this even more. Push it down even more. And so I can then just sort of start to step forward to see how that looks, right? And right now it doesn't look like the character is actually going forward enough, right? It goes up to that, so maybe a little bit more like that. I have no idea why the eye has gone black on me here. Oh well, that'll come back. So I'm also going to play around just a little bit with the eye placement here to see if I can get something that looks a little bit better, right? So I can kind of lean my character into this a little bit. So maybe something like this. Eye direction. Raise it up. That upper lid, I want to keep it open a little bit more. And I had one over here that was like a bulge, right? So you kind of, well, no, bulge. It is scale. There we go. And so I'm just tweaking with this a little bit to make it look like that character's leading the motion in. You're probably going to put in just as much work on these breakdown keys as you do your key poses, right? For me, these are telling me a lot of information about how my character gets from one pose to the other, or how my character is reacting to. Sorry, it's hard to think and animate at the same time. There we go. Now in the process of doing this, you can always make changes to your actual keys if you need to. Now, that's one breakdown key. Inevitably, the question is going to come up, how many of these do I need? How many breakdown keys do I need before I can move forward? I'm not doing anything in the graph editor yet. Right now, I'm just making sure I have enough information in the form of keyframes that I can move into the graph editor and make informed decisions, right? So the number of breakdown keys is really up to you. Having said that, for the most part, most people usually are not putting in enough of them. My 2 cents is I usually animate, I try to have a breakdown key every, say, 5 or 6 frames at the least. Occasionally in some bigger open areas, it'll be a little longer than that. Or, you know, if the character's just sort of setting there, I don't key that as much, I do more in the graph editor. But for this, like, I've added that one breakdown key, but that's still not enough to tell me about how this character is moving forward, right? I still think I need to do that a little bit more. Maybe do a little bit more something with this. There we go. So I have from here to here to here, but that's still 20 frames. That's almost a whole second of animation that takes place with just 3 keyframes. And so when I watch that beginning part, it still just feels too slow and squishy to me, right? Like, it doesn't feel like there's any control of the timing to me. So a breakdown key can also be used to hold a character in one pose a little longer, right? So for example, if I just made a copy of frame 1, right? Have my entire character selected, right click, copy, and I pasted that out here on frame 7, right? Then how that motion is going to look now is he's going to go into that a little faster right there, right? Because now it's just taking 3 frames to get to that second pose. And so by adding additional poses to kind of hold a character in one stance a little longer, that's going to be a way you can manipulate your timing, right? We call these holds, but holds like that, where I just copy an entire keyframe, is not really a good idea in 3D animation. The reason for that is because if I were to just play frames 1 through 7 for you, right? Like, the animation is playing right now, but it's not moving at all, right? And you can get away with that a little bit in 2D animation, but in 3D animation, it just feels like we have it paused, right? It doesn't feel like anything is actually happening. What we need here is what we call a moving hold. And a moving hold is a kind of breakdown as well, right? A moving hold means we're mostly going to stay in this pose, but we're going to start a little, or have a little bit of motion in there, right? So to extend this back out to about frame 70 again, instead of just having a copy of this key pose, I usually find like somewhere in here, like the first few frames, and just sort of have a little bit of an ease out, right? So like frame 1 or frame 2 is not exactly like frame 1, but it's pretty close, right? Frame 3 is also pretty close. So somewhere between frame 2 and 3, I could borrow what is in that and have that as my moving hold. So let's say I chose frame 2, right? One of the ways I can do this is just to set a keyframe, and then move that keyframe, right? Another way, and so you'll see what we have now is it's still fast, but it's not completely dead through there. It's moving just a little bit, right? The other way we can do that, I'll actually show you again on this one. Another way we can do that is to have our mouse or have our time slider on that keyframe and middle click drag. And you'll see as I'm middle click dragging, nothing is updating, right? So if I start middle click dragging while it's on frame 2, everything is going to stay in the same position as it was on frame 2. And then as long as I have everything selected, I can hit S, and it sets a keyframe there, right? So now what I have is a little bit of a faster motion into that little squash transition. But when he does that, then it gets squishy again, right? It gets like all slow and sluggish as it goes up to this pose, right? So like that transition still takes 10 frames. So we can do a couple of things here. I could go to like frame 18 and middle click, drag that back to here. And so what you're going to get now is a little bit of a poppier motion over to that, right? And then it's going to kind of ease up to this pose, right? And so you can see how we can kind of use that, right? And we can continue to do that. Like I could borrow like frame 32, pull it back to here, not D, S. And so we're starting to get a little bit more ability to kind of adjust our timing, right? So just by adding these little moving holds, I'm getting like this texture to the movement, right? Now it's kind of happening in these like short, quick motions, right? Now another type of breakdown key that you can do is an overshoot, which means we want to go to that pose, but then go a little past that pose, right? So let's try that and see what happens. Like maybe it's this one, right? Let's see. So from here up to here, right? What I could do is actually reverse these here. Like, so I could get something like frame 34 and have it go past that, bless you. And so now watch what our character does here, right? So we get like it overshoots that pose and comes back, right? Now that kind of messes up my other pose because I kind of built in a lean in here. But we could still do that, right? I could still sort of borrow frame 21, take it out to here. And so now I get, right. So I just wanted to kind of recognize that all I'm really doing right here is just borrowing keys that already exist on my timeline and using that as a breakdown to adjust my timing. With each of these, I could make subtle changes to the pose to allow it to read a little bit more clearly. Right? So if I wanted to keep this overshoot there, right? Maybe what I would do is I would change it up just a little bit, extend past there, pull this. And so now the animation, well, that didn't play very smoothly, did it? Looks like it needs another breakdown in here, right about here. I would take it up even higher. So let's see how that looks. There we go. So now I'm getting kind of this little like, something like that, right? And then the character kind of looks forward. So this is sort of the blocking, we call what you had at the beginning of class, we call that the blocking pass, because we can show that in step mode and everybody will be able to understand it. This is often called the blocking plus more, which means we have all of those keys that we needed, but we're adding in some refining poses, refining keys to sort of clarify the motion. And we can always keep breaking this down more and more. Like even from here to here, I could add another little pose in here where the character squashes just a bit. So we get a little bit of a, there we go. Now I'm just gonna kind of keep working on this just a little bit. Some of the other places where I feel like I could use a breakdown pose. If we look here from how our character goes from this surprise pose to this, right? This is our anticipation before our jump, right? And right now it doesn't have very much build-up for that. So I mean, we can always readjust timing a little bit if we needed to, give it just a little bit of time in here for that anticipation. And I could use a breakdown key to hold that anticipation longer, right? So I set a key right down 33 right before I got to my, my anticipation pose, and I can drag that out a little longer, right? So now it goes, whoa, what did I just do? There we go. Now for me, I want to go from my squash out to my stretch really fast. Right now it's taking me about 4 frames, so I'm going to make that a little faster. I want that to happen in about 2 or 3 frames. And I can always add a breakdown in there if I wanted to as well. Right? If I wanted to go from, if I wanted to leave it in 4 frames, I could kind of add a breakdown that continues to drag, continues to have a little squash in it like this. Another control in here that, there we go, that's what I'm looking for. There we go. Up to there, and then sort of the same on my landing here. Like it kind of, that gets a little boring, so I can put a little bit of drag in there if I wanted to. Select everything, maybe go out here to frame 68 and borrow from that, but then heavily alter what I'm getting out of it, right? So maybe a little bit more like this. So let's say we're getting at that look bad. Maybe I'll change my key pose. And then the last little thing I'll do, a couple of little things I'll do, is I want to sort of ease into this upper pose right here. So again, I'll grab everything, set a keyframe. I'm just going to extend this a little longer. I also kind of feel like this jump is a little slow from 53 up to 59. That's a little slow, so I'll speed that up a little bit. And then the same here, just to make that whole jump just a little faster. Okay. All of that for a pretty simple statement, which is all I did was add more information to how this character moved to my timeline, right? All I did was make more poses that put me in control of how this character moved, okay? This is something I'm doing like in real time. I'm not really expecting you to follow along in real time. You're going to work on yours and you're just going to craft it. Like you're going to keep crafting it until you get it to a point that you're happy with it. One second, I want to show you something. Okay. So, well, that's not a good example. So, don't worry about that. Let's just open up a text document, just so we can look at this as a process. So I just want to look at this just so we have just so we sort of have a list of how we want to work, right? The general process, I used to have a series of images that I saved this. The general process for all animation on a character or a complex rig goes like this. Blocking, which most of you have already done. Blocking plus, which is what I've covered. All of these are us still thinking about each of these key poses as a whole drawing. We're setting keyframes on everything, no matter whether we're moving it or not. There's just keyframes all over the place on this. But if you'll notice, they're all on the same keys, right? If I go to frame 34 and I select the top of this character's head, it's on frame 34. If I select this middle control, there's a keyframe on frame 34. If I select this ground object here, which I didn't even move, there's a keyframe on frame 34. And that means that if I grab what's on frame 34 and I grab all of those keys and move it, all I'm moving is my drawing, right? I'm adjusting my timing for that pose, right? This is something that drives some people crazy, right? But you didn't move that. Why did you key it? Because I can't tell the future, right? I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm nailing everything down just in case I needed that to stay nailed down later, right? Which leads to a graph editor that is very annoying to a lot of people. For example, that control that I have selected now, that one on the ground, look at this. It all has curves on it, and all of those curves are completely flat, right? The reason for that is later if I decide I just need this one keyframe right there, I just need that to be up here. All of my other keyframes stay where I showed or where I told them to earlier, right? If that were not the case, right? Let's say I was not setting keyframes on all of those things, right? And I decide to move that one keyframe now, it adjusts my entire animation, right? I would, there are two mistakes that people make in animation the most often. The first one, the one that is the most common, is not setting your project. And you've heard me say that phrase so many times, set your project, right? The second one is just assuming I don't know what I'm talking about on this post-to-post process. Set a keyframe on everything. So here's the reason, right? And I mean, I showed you this here, but if I go back to this key pose here, right? I have key poses on each side of this, right? And if I want to change the way the character looks on frame 31, I can do whatever I want to this, right? It doesn't change what happens on frame 34 and frame 29. Now, if there were not a keyframe on this, on frame 34 and 29, right? Just delete that and see what happens. See how. So, my animation doesn't look that much different without those key poses, right? However, if I were to go messing with that key pose now and drag it way over there, if I look at frame 34, there's a whole section of my animation that's messed up, right? So, trust me on this when I say, keyframe everything. Don't just go grab one control and set lots of keyframes all over it, right? Keyframe this as if you were drawing the whole character, right? That's one of the reasons I try to get you to work in stepped mode early. At this point, the next phase in this process is splining, right? You'll hear that phrase used a lot. Basically, it just means we're going to go into the graph editor and work in the graph editor. We're going to work with those spline curves, right? So the next stage is splining, right? Before you start that stage, right here in the middle of this, I'm going to wedge it in, right? Timing, right? You're going to look at your character's animation as it is right now. You can look at it in spline mode, or you can look at it in the auto tangent mode. You can look at it however you want to. You can look at it in stepped. And you're going to try to assess, is the timing correct? And the reason for that is because it's super easy to adjust timing right now, right? If this animation is, if he holds that pose a little too long right there, he's not moving hardly at all. That needs to be more of a moving pose. So if he holds that pose just a little too long right there, whoa. Let me fix this. You're not seeing it update in this window. Settings and preferences, time slider, all. There we go. So if this hesitation here is a little too long, it's very easy to shift my entire animation right now, right? I can grab all of that and make it happen earlier, right? After I'm done splining, my timeline is going to be a mess. There's going to be key ticks everywhere. And although I can do timing adjustments then, it's going to mess up other things. Right now, if I do a pass of just thinking about my animation timing, then it's really easy to adjust that, right? So I would challenge you to look at your animation as objectively as you can at this point. And that's the really hard part, right? You've been staring at it for hours, and it's going to start looking correct to you, right? So I think I've already shown you this. Have I shown you how to flip a video in VLC? Okay. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. If you have a pocket mirror, like if you have a mirror in your dorm, I used to carry a mirror with me. I used to one of my wife's old compacts, like when she was done with it, I just took out the makeup part and just kept it in my pocket with me all the time, for a lot of different reasons. But one of them is you can just hold a mirror up to your screen and watch it mirrored, right? Like try to look at it as objectively as possible. Ask people for feedback at that point about your timing and about the poses. Because once we move forward from here, it's a little harder to fix it. It's a little harder to make those changes, right? So I'm going to go ahead and save mine where it's at. File, increment and save. And I'm going to go ahead and start moving forward. The method I like to do, like at least for this class so you can see it, I'm going to go to my animation preset, which means I can see the animation above me and I have the graph editor below me here. And I'll just go ahead and show my NURBS curves so I can see them. I usually select all of my curves first, right, and make sure that they're all set to auto tangent, right? So select everything. Let's try that again. Select everything here, even that first row, and make sure it's set to auto. There's one more thing I want to do. If you look in here on each of my keyframes in my graph editor, they have these little diamond shapes, and you'll notice that like the tangents have these little triangles at the end. That means these are not weighted tangents. So I'm going to grab everything one more time. Let's grab everything and go to curves and set this to weighted tangents. And then sometimes you want to make sure auto key set. And so the reason I do that is now I have a couple more editing options on this, right? Not only can I grab this and adjust the tangent, I can also stretch the tangent, and I can, obviously when I break them, I can stretch them one at a time, right? So it just gives me a little bit more editing options for those tangents. All right. For the most part, you all are probably comfortable in using the graph editor. Being able to understand what each of those curves mean is only sort of part of the process at this point. Because when you're animating a bouncing ball, you're like, sure, I can figure out what translate Y means, right? At this point right now, I have probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 different objects selected, right? Maybe not that many. Let's be more conservative. Let's say 30. Right? I have 30 objects selected. Each of those have translate options. They have rotate options. Some of them have completely custom options. Every one of those generated a curve, right? So which one do we start with? Idea? Okay. This is why like we spent that first half of the class talking about like overlapping action and stuff like that. Right? If we were starting with the pendulum, all right, which one would we start with? Like of the whole rig, we had the platform, we had 3 arms, and then that little ball at the end. Which curve would you polish first, or which curve would you work on first?
The platform.
Huh? The platform. Why the platform? Because it's the one driving the motion, right? And so, in this case, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at our character and ask, What is the root of that motion? What is it that is driving that motion? For our character to get off the ground, we have to start with this controller that is kind of buried under here. If you look, it's that one there on the ground, right? And so that motion is really important on this entire jump, right? That's really what drives kind of the up and down. Really, if we think about it, it's kind of both of these here, but that's what I'm going to start with, right? And if I look at that, you'll see that for the most part, it's not doing very much. It's just kind of sitting there. It's got this one lean back right there, but then it sort of sits still for a while, and then it has a little bit of a sideways motion and it kind of eases into this spot here, right? I'm actually going to go to my perspective view here a little bit so I can see it better. So you'll look at this and you'll see that translate X is the side-to-side motion, right? And what we should be seeing is that like the character is jumping a little bit to one side, so it should get to this point and pretty much stay there, but it doesn't. It has a little bit of wiggle here. And so for this curve, all I might do is just sort of level that out a little bit, and then maybe just sort of look at this transition and see if that feels pretty natural. So that's not a lot of editing. All right. That is so little editing that some people would ignore it and be like, nah, I'm not going to even worry about that, right? This is the part of animation to me that, like when you set keyframes in your blocking pass, like you set a keyframe and then you completely did something different for the next keyframe, right? Every decision you made a big noticeable change to the motion or to the animation. That's not what happens here. What happens here is you're going to make sometimes hours of tiny changes, and you're going to look at it and be like, I can't tell any difference. Right? The reason for that is you've been kind of along for the ride too, right? You've sort of heard the analogy of like how you boil a lobster or whatever, is you put it in cold water and you turn up the water a little bit at a time, and you don't notice that change. And like it's kind of that, like you've made all of these incremental changes and you're not noticing the progress you're making. And a lot of people get frustrated at this point and just say, it's not worth it, it's done, I'm finished with it, or I'm going to try something more drastic so I can see the result of that change. This splining process is important because all of this is little pieces of math, right? And that math can add up quickly. If I have one curve that's slightly off, and then that's controlling another curve that's slightly off, and then that's controlling another curve that's slightly off, that last curve is going to be off pretty big, right? Like we're making these really subtle changes, and they're going to compound over time. So you may work on this for an hour and not notice a huge difference, but if you go back and watch what you started with, it has made progress, right? And this is the part that frustrates a lot of people because they want to see a quick change. They want to see a big step in progress. What I would encourage you to do is play blast at each stage of this, like play blast at your blocking plus, and then work on your splining for an hour and come back and look at it and see if it looks better, right? And over time, you'll start to see that it is getting better. It's just, it's not got a lot of feedback to it, right? Like you make changes, and it's not like you tweaked one curve and suddenly everything's perfect, right? This is like a slow progression, and it will start to come together over time. The biggest key to this is just sort of trusting the process. So those were small options or small changes I made to the curve. But if I go back to my translate Y, now this is my up and down, right? So this is the character sort of going, doing the jump up, right? And just like the bouncing ball, it's one of the reasons we start with all that, right now the character is kind of easing off the ground right there. I want it to look like the character sort of pops off the ground, right? He's pushing against the ground. So this should be the last pose where the character is actually touching the ground, and then I want it to come up kind of quickly. So I'm going to break these tangents and kind of get a very similar sort of bouncing ball effect here. Coming down, I still want to have that same effect. So maybe something like this. So I'm just adjusting that curve a little bit, breaking that tangent. Yeah, there we go. And this is my character's like hang time up in the air, right? So the more I want to exaggerate that, I can. Let me go ahead and see if I can set this to, see if this is viewable this way. Render cam. And so just those two little changes, again, I hit play. It's not a major difference to what I had before. So again, I just have to trust it, keep working on it. My translate Z, this is my character's motion forward. One of the things I notice is like it kind of lunges forward here, and then it sort of slows down its motion forward, and then it also still feels like it's not plateauing out enough there. So I'll do like that. Maybe try to make that seem like it's traveling at a pretty steady pace. I also don't really want this easing in here. I kind of want it to get there kind of quickly. So maybe something like that, and maybe break these tangents and set them to linear. So I'm gonna do something like that. And it's a really small change. There we go. Nope. I need him to hit the ground there, don't I? So I can move that back. I may even just delete that key. What's that look like? Yeah, there we go. Now, the thing with the graph editor at this point, we can slide keys around, right? Like if I'm not happy with where one of these keys is hitting, I can slide it up and down, but I can also make it happen earlier, right? Like if I wanted it to look like the character gets there a little earlier, I can start breaking my my timeline now in that way. So it's looking good. My rotate. So this is where we're going to find lots of weird little anomalies, right? If I look at my character's rotation here, it's going to rotate backward, and then forward again, and then backward again. And I'm not sure that that one is needed, right? So I can delete that. In fact, I may even kind of favor these a little bit. Okay. And then this is my rotate side to side. It's got a weird thing happening there. Maybe I'll clean that up a little bit. Ease that in. And then my rotate Z, nothing's really happening in there. So again, I just worked on that for a reasonable amount of time. Not a lot got better, right? But it is a little bit better, whether we can really noticeably see it or not. Some of the timing is better. To me, some of the stuff I'm starting to notice now is that that part is better and the other parts are not reacting to it correctly. So really, a lot of that is what's happening in the splining process. We're looking at how it's moving and we're seeing how we can adjust the curves, just like with the graph editor arrow. How can I adjust these curves to make it react more appropriately, right? So a good example of this to me is my character hits the ground right here, right? Hits it kind of hard, and then it takes it a little too long to get down to here, right? It takes that, like that motion just takes too long. It's taking 4 frames to do that, right? And I want it to feel more responsive. So I can go to my translate Y of that. And you can see kind of why that's happening, right? Is it's that my translate Y is here, and it's taking those 4 frames to get from this peak to this dip. Right? So if I want to make that feel more responsive, what I can do is grab this, I can stretch it out more, I can grab this, and I can push it even deeper. So now it's doing most of that motion over 2 frames, right? And so now that's going to hopefully feel a little bit better there. See? So it's little bitty changes like this that you're going to start seeing the actual results. I'm not really, this part's not going to seem super encouraging. This isn't something that I can like, let me tell you how to do this, because everybody does this a little differently. One of the reasons, and I know this is not always fun to watch somebody animate, one of the reasons I kind of do this anyway is because where I've made the biggest steps forward in my life is by watching someone animate differently than I do, and then taking a few pieces of that and applying it to my own work. Right? Eventually, this is weird. Like, you remember on The Matrix when like Neo's talking to that guy, he's like looking at the line of code, and he's like, I just see stuff in it, right? Like, I don't even know what this curve is, but I know it's wrong. Right? I can look at this curve and realize that's not a curve, that's not how a curve should look, right? Like, there's just things that don't make sense in the way things progress in this, right? So when we're looking at our curves, the first thing we do is figure out what that curve means, right? This is our translate X on that head control. And so that means that's that character's sort of side to side motion on this head control, right? It is this, right? And I can just see little hitches in here that I think probably could be smoothed out. Now that's not helpful because I can see them, but you may not be able to, and I can't really tell you, here is the 7 things to look for, right? Really what it is through years of experience, or through even weeks, days of experience of messing with this curve, you will see that when this happens, there's going to be a result in that data, and I usually don't like that result. So for example, I don't like when I get stuff like this, right? It's a sharp down, a sharp up, a sharp down, right? Because things don't move that way, right? That's one of the reasons, one of the 12 principles of animation is slow in and slow out. There's very little slow in and slow out. This feels like a ping pong ball bouncing up and down, right? It's like, got these sharp changes. Most stuff comes to a gradual stop and the gradual acceleration, right? And the amount of gradualness in that is what we're controlling. And so even without knowing what this is, I can see, like if we look from the side to side motion, it does a quick over and then a quick back before coming back to here, right? And so to me, that's the part wrong right there. Like it goes quick over and then it comes all the way to the extreme back to here. I would just ease that in, right? And maybe to make this quick down feel less quick, I would either ease into it just a little bit, maybe something like this, or I may also kind of go to add key tools, and do just a little bit of an ease out on it, right? So I can just kind of play around with this motion until I get something closer to what I think would feel natural. And maybe about like that. Let's see. So just that little bit of a change, again, is not a major, like there's no major result I'm seeing in my animation. I'm seeing a tiny result, and those are going to add up. It's going to come back again to this side, and you see it hits there, and then just slowly starts inclining again, right? If we think in terms of, like, I always use the, David Edwards, a guy I used to go to school here, used the term like roller coaster to think about this. If I look at this curve and think of this as sort of a profile view of a roller coaster, that doesn't seem very fun, right? It's a quick drop and then you're flat. Like, and like that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Maybe I would go in here to add key tool, and have a little bit of an overshoot before it sort of settled up here, right? Little things like this isn't bad. Like we kind of have the easing into here. Occasionally though, I will still add just a little bit more ease back out of that. So maybe something like that. And so these are just a bunch of little things that I notice. Like this here, to me, looks like a mess. My character is going to go forward quickly, and then it kind of flattens out for a long time. And that there's no real sense to this. So I would just sort of try to make a little more sense. Try to make that a little bit more like this, right? And then my last little thing that I always think about is what I call settle time. So my character gets to pretty much this end pose and then just eases out to here, right? Sometimes just having this kind of feel like a settle to a wave helps. So if I go to key, add key tool, maybe overshoot just by a little, kind of come back, right? So maybe something like that. So again, all of these are really tiny changes to a single curve that's not really going to make a huge difference in the overall motion. However, all of these changes are going to compound, right? If I keep doing this to the entire thing, I'm going to find lots of little places. So this is the squash down here, right? Maybe before I do that squash down, I do a quick little anticipation up, right? And so this is a really small one, but watch what happens now. It kind of goes up a little bit and then down, right? And so maybe for this down here, I could do a little bit of an overshoot to there and kind of settle back up. So it's constantly looking at what this curve means and saying, how can I refine that motion in a way that either makes a little bit more sense or a way that is a little bit more appealing. Right? So keys, add key tool. So I'm going to continue to work just a little bit more. Again, I know this isn't like the most exciting stuff to watch. Just bear with me. Let me try to make some changes to it till you're able to see a little bit better of an animation out of it. So that's interesting. It's forward. And I actually want that to overshoot some and then come back. I go through the rotates. So again, if we were thinking in terms of roller coaster on this one would, break your spine. Like there's some not good things happening in this one. And this is the rotation of this, like the forward and back rotation on this character's head. So stuff that are like things that like sort of throw up a red flag to me is whenever a rotation goes completely flat like that, that means I probably just stopped keyframing it. Like I wasn't putting enough work into my posing. And so that means I just sort of have a duplicate of that same frame there. And you see that happen twice, right? So this is the character's head rotating back and forth, right? And so what happens is the character's head rotates forward here and then just kind of stops. So I'm going to add some more keys to that to add just a little bit more motion to that. Like I want it to rotate past that and then kind of settle back into this. And then for here, maybe that. So let me go through here and there we go. That one probably needs some overshoot. This one. Go through here. Oh. This is bad. And this one too. There's not a ton of motion happening in these directions. I'm just trying to fix these areas where it plateaus out too much. Okay, so just from fixing those, let's watch the animation now and see if it looks any better. So particularly the ending is looking a lot better, right? Like that section to me, the beginning isn't doing quite what I wanted to. I still feel like that head flip back needs to be a little faster, but the ending, sort of the overlapping action right there, like all that's feeling pretty good to me. I want to show you something that's, I wouldn't say a cheat in any way, right? And it's definitely not a something to just apply to your whole animation. But a lot of times when stuff is feeling too stiff or like there's not enough overlapping action, it's just because it's all still happening too close to the same time, right? So if I wanted to add I'm going to fix one more thing really quick before I do this. So to me, it's that character's head looking back right there. That rotation and movement back to here is just a little too slow. So I'm just going to grab these keys and sort of scale that in, snap them, and maybe on my rotation, move that in a little bit more, just so it kind of has a little bit more of a snappy, there it goes. Maybe my translate up and down. Oh. So it kind of settles down to there a little hard to me, actually a little low. So here's the trick. You remember when you were animating your, like I'm nowhere near done. Every control, I'll come back to that. So I'm nowhere near done, but this is just something I'm going to show you as like a little bit of trick for overlapping action. You remember the pendulum and how we kind of got some overlapping action in that, which was after we edited the curves, we went through and we offset whole sections of the curve, right? We can do that here too, right? If I want my character to look more eager, maybe I want that control that's controlling the upper part of the head, maybe I want it to move first, right? I want it to feel like the character kind of, like the head is leading that action. If I want it to feel more floppy, then I want that control to move later, right? And so I can go in here and let's say I have this control selected. I can go in here and just sort of shift that whole control maybe a frame forward for that look forward right here, right? Actually, let me see where that is. Up to there, maybe, right? And so maybe I'll just have all of that happen one frame earlier. And sometimes I'll do that just to see if it makes it any better. And in this case, it really didn't. In this case, it actually broke that flip of the head there, right? So that's good. That means it shows you this is not always the right answer. Sometimes I will also, like for the second half of this, the character goes from like here to here, and it feels like the head should kind of be following, not leading. So maybe I would drag all of that one frame later. And let's see what that looks like, just to see if it made it any better. Yeah, I think it made that landing a little bit better. Right? This control still needs some work right through here. Like it goes forward. I think it's taking too long to come back to there. Or maybe it's going too far forward here. And then that rotation is being weird. Don't like that. There we go. So that's feeling a lot better now. Now, I still haven't even messed with this middle curve. There is some stuff happening in it, particularly right there, whatever that is, for this anticipation back. Oh, that's the rotation one on it. It's this curve right here. So I definitely need to edit with that one. Here's the part about this process, right? Splining means that we're going to go through all of these curves. This is where you put on headphones and you just work, right? Like this is when we talk about every one of these concentrations having their flavor of tedium. This is my flavor of tedium. Like this is what I just put on an audiobook or I put on some music and I just edit curves for literally hours. Like to edit an animation, I will be in the graph editor, like a 10-second animation, I may be in the graph editor for 14 hours, right, just doing this. I know that doesn't always sound exciting. Sierra, did you have a question? Tedium? Like the boring, repetitive parts? Like it's tedious? Like tedious? Wait. Yeah. You've never heard that one before? No. I didn't make that up, did I? Did I make that up? Hey Siri, is tedium a word? STD. What? Let's try that again. You can't script that. Hey Siri, is tedium a word? You may be right. It is a word.
Check the display on your iPhone for the answer.
Tedium. The feeling of being bored by something tedious. So, whew. Yeah. So yeah, it's like repetitive and kind of dull. So like UV unwrapping is sort of what we use for an example of that in model, right? Most people don't like that. This gets less tedious. Like eventually you stop seeing the curves and you just start seeing the performance coming out of the character. But I have to be honest, you literally have to look at every curve on this entire rig. So if there are 30 controls on there, you look at every control or every channel on all 30 of those controls. And sometimes your answer is, that one isn't doing anything, or oh, that's just doing that one pop where the eye opens, that's what I intended. But your question shouldn't be am I done with that? Can I move past it? Your question should be, how can I make that curve better, right? And if you ask that, then there may actually be a very small change you can make that slowly adds to the quality of the animation. So we have blocking plus or breakdowns, do a timing pass, and then splining. Now the next phase that you're going to hear people talk about is polish, right? The problem with that is polish isn't really a thing. What this really means is splining. That needs a P in there, doesn't it? Splining 2 and splining 3 and splining 4. You're just going to live in the graph editor until your art director says you're out of time, it's done, right? And every time you go through that curve, or every time you polish an element of this, right, it's going to get a little bit better. When we say polish, what we really usually mean is that last pass to put the really tiny things in it that can't be seen, they can only be felt, right? So an example of this is your eye, like when your eye blinks. Let me show you this, because I have an eye blink in here, right? When my character's eye closes from here, let's see, it goes from here to wait, it's right here, right there. How the eye closes over these 4 frames, I would go in there and put a breakdown key to favor one frame over the other, right? So for example, it's completely open there, completely closed there. which blink is that? Let me get in here where I can see it. Yeah, here we go. This upper lid, lower lid, right? It's this transition here, from here to here, closed, right? It may be literally adding a pose in between here or favoring one of these poses to make that blink feel more like interesting, right? So it could literally be, that polish pass could literally be going in here and adding a key to favor how this blink closes and then how this blink opens, right? This level of polish is really subtle, right? Another element of polish that we see, particularly with characters, is contact points. So for little things like I'll put overlapping action on my fingers, like my character's fingers, how they move. Little things like my pinky usually has a tendency to start moving before my index finger. The first knuckle of each finger has a tendency to start rotating before the second two do, right? Actually, the other way around. The two end ones start to curl in first before the first one does, right? Then as I open, the first one has a tendency to open first as the second two do, right? It's that level of polish, little things like when my finger touches something, that little slight bend that you get in the tip of your finger on that contact point. That level of polish is the difference between what you see in TV animation that has to be cranked out the door really quickly and Pixar and Disney, who get to really spend forever on making something look great, right? And you also, like, when we talk about sort of fidelity of animation, like just different projects require different amounts, right? If you are animating for a, if you're animating for a mobile video game, like I may get, like if I were doing that project for a client, I may have a couple of hours to do a run cycle, right? If I'm animating a run cycle for is it Kratos in God of War, they're probably going to give me more than 2 hours, right? Because that character is going to be on the screen doing that run cycle all the time. If I'm animating a run cycle for Mike Wazowski in like the climax scene of Monsters Inc. Part 7 or whatever, like you're going to get a lot more time. A good comparison of this, video games usually you have a little bit less time to polish. And that just means on this list of polish passes, maybe you don't get to do splining pass number 4, right? You get to do as many as you can in the amount of time you have. In video games, like the characters I was doing for Civ 5 and Civ 6, a 10-second animation clip, I would probably be allotted, I think it was 16 hours, about 16 hours for the everything past blocking. So really probably about 32 hours for that entire thing. So about 4 or 5 days, right, is kind of where I'll be looking at. A 10-second animation clip at Pixar or Blue Skies, you would probably get about a month, right? So you get an idea of how much time you get to polish on stuff. And really, when we're in this phase, it's just how much detail are you putting into this. Does everybody know what motion blur is? It's like when you're rendering in Maya, if it renders frame 31, but your character starts, let's say frame 30, your character's in one spot, frame 32, your character's in another spot, frame 31, it's in between, it will kind of evaluate those before and after frames and kind of put a smear around it, a little bit of a blur around it to make it look like it's blurring in that arc, right? For feature length animation, they go in between the keyframes, in between frames 31 and 32, and edit the curve in that in order to get the motion blur to happen in a clean arc. Right? That's the level of polish you're looking at for film animation. All of that stuff is just to tell you, like, there is no such thing as done, right? And I think that what I would emphasize is that in school, we rarely get the chance to get an animation to that polished point that we really need to in order to make it look professional, right? The best way to do that is to get as early of a start on it, but just put as much time as you can into it. Most of the time in portfolio, that's what we're doing, is we're telling them, take this and put that final passive polish on it, make this just a little bit better, right? So I just kind of want to talk about that a little bit, about this process. Like, this is kind of what I would say is blocking is a must. Blocking plus is a must. Getting your timing done is a must. And then you look at how much time you have left on your project, and you spline for as much of that as you can. You get it as polished as you can until it's time to render, right? And so at that point, you have to call it quits and render. You're never finished. You just run out of time. Okay. So having said that, have we talked about a due date for this guy?
No.
I didn't think so. So let's do that. That sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? D2L. Animation fundamentals, yes. Content. So we are currently, let's do a couple things. Okay. We're on the Hobo rig. Oh yeah, he was due October 23rd. Did y'all get that? Obviously I made some changes to this. As it is right now, we are right here, October 30th, right? We're a little behind schedule. What I'd like to do is give you enough time to polish on this. So today is Tuesday, so I don't want to have it done. It's not going to be due next class period, right? So Thursday, like, my thinking is I want to have a final, like, cleanly rendered animation. So instead of being due the 1st, how about the 6th? Does the 6th sound okay to y'all? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and pencil that in, or go ahead and put that in the project. I know this is not updated. So this is Tuesday, November 6th. Okay? So that gives us one more week to keep working on this. What that is doing, I will point this out, like, I completely reworked this entire process, like this entire project, class, sorry. And I intentionally put a little too much in here, recognizing I was going to have to pull some of that out. I have a couple of days here right before Thanksgiving where I'm doing some demos for our final. So our final right now is set to start on the 13th. I don't think that we're going to make that. I think we'll be getting close, but I think where we'll probably really be starting the final is probably right before Thanksgiving, right? So right before that break. And that pretty much gives us all the way from Thanksgiving to the end of the semester. So that's, what, 1, 2, about 3 weeks to work on it, right? If I can squeeze that a little earlier, I think I can, because I think a lot of what I'm going to be covering in this next project, we're kind of covering now, which is process. So I think that means I'll be able to give you a little bit more in-class work time on this next little project, which is basically the first bin-bot animation. Have an idea, which may actually chop out part of Project 6 and just implement that into the final to give us a little bit more time. So we'll talk about that over the next few days, but recognize what I'm trying to not let this eat into your final time. I really want you to have a minimum of 3 weeks to work on it. I'd like you to have a little bit more if possible. And I think that we're still going to be able to pull that off. But I may end up restructuring these next 2 projects, not completely dropping a project, as much as starting our final early and sort of incorporating Project 6 into it. So let me think about that and see if that seems like that'll give you more time to work on it. Before we get too far into that, though, I will mention that our final is, unlike every other project in this class, going to be a group project. Most people are, how do you feel about that? Just out of curiosity. How many of you like group projects? Not fans? Okay. A handful of you are. For a long time, I tried making the final an optional group project. And what I realized is everybody who took the option of doing it as a group project ended up getting a better piece. And so I have a method that I use for group projects, and we'll talk about that in the future. But it's not the pick a group, have fun. Like, it's not that, right? Basically what I do is I have you sort of fill out this this information form in which I take your preferences into consideration, but I also sort of consider who would make a good partner for you, right? And so it'll be a small group, but really your grade is going to count for your work entirely. The only reason I do it as a group project is so you have a group for feedback, to kind of keep you accountable, and also I don't know, it just always seems to work better. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but just kind of know that that's coming up very soon. Before we get the final started, I'll have you fill out that form. In there, I ask, do you have a preference of somebody you would like to be in a group with? Do you have a preference of people you do not want to be in a group with? And I keep that completely private, but I use that to construct the groups myself, right? I look at that. And what I don't want is a group that is sort of unfairly balanced. I don't want I don't want a bunch of people who are quiet and possibly struggling to be in a group where they're not getting anything out of that. And I don't want all of the super high performers in class being in a group. And then you just get this weird division in the project. So I try to evenly distribute it to where I think people are going to benefit from it the most. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the upcoming days. But just looking at this, I do think I'm going to try to take a little bit of work off of your plate in the next few months here. Mainly because of this, right? I would much rather you get to Splining Pass 2 and 3 and have one piece that looks really good than to only get to do one splining pass on something and it looks okay, right? I want to try to see if we can get a really solid piece out of your final, or out of your next few projects. So I'm going to shut up. Next class period is open work time. Some of you may have noticed I stopped taking attendance. It's because that little sheet I had ran out of time slots, and I haven't printed another one yet. So you are all here today. Good job. Basically, if I forget to take attendance, that was a freebie. I will say next class period is open work time, so I probably won't be taking attendance that day either, but I would strongly encourage you to be here for the splining part of this. And since we're giving you a week from today to be working on this, we'll have sort of a critique day on Wednesday, or on Wednesday, a week from today on Tuesday, so on the 6th. All right, any questions on any of this? I know I talked a lot, right? Any questions on anything else? Okay, well, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video. Oh, is this a question for this, or is this a question at your desk?
Just overall.
Okay.
What's the pizza party?
I don't know, so I don't want to tell you. I believe what I put it in my calendar for was November 15th. But wait until you get that email to confirm. That was just sort of the tentative date we were trying to set aside for it. It also is not confirmed yet. Nothing is confirmed yet. For all I know, we're having a raw oyster bar in Todd's basement. I have no idea what we're doing. It could be anything. So wait until you get the actual confirmation email about all of that. But yeah, I think it's a few weeks away, or a week or so away. Up until that point, if you kind of got the grade that you were hoping for and you want to chat about anything with me. A lot of it's going to be based off of memory, like in terms of like, hey, do you remember who my mentor was? I don't actually have that list, and Marty isn't. I think Marty has that list, and it's not stored on the network anywhere where I can find it. So I'll have to like kind of give you my best memory of that sort of stuff. But yeah, anything you have questions about midpoint, like what's coming up next? I know many of you are probably meeting with an advisor. The cool thing about that is after this class and midpoint, most of the curriculum is available to you. Like it's not a free-for-all, like take whatever you want, but like the classes that are coming up next semester are stuff like character animation and effects. I think there's an effects animation, either that or lighting and rendering. I can never remember which one it is. So there's several upcoming animation courses that you would be eligible for. So there's a lot of cool stuff coming up. I think you'll enjoy it. So out of curiosity, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video now because this video is not necessary for this part. Out of curiosity,